Yo guys, and welcome back to the channel. Hope you guys are doing fantastic as usual. And today we are going to be continuing our work on our beloved To-Do application as usual. I hope you guys enjoy this series where we develop a real world to-do application together. If you have any other video ideas of things you'd like to see on this channel, feel free to comment that. I would love to hear your opinions. But for now, let's continue working on our to-do application. And in the last episode, we actually implemented an amazing feature which I've been thinking about for a long time, and that is having multiple boards, or lists rather. With the help of multiple boards, you can structure your to-do items in a nice fancy way. You can separate different to-do items to different boards, so you don't have to clutter it all into one big board. You can just have multiple boards. You can name them something like work, personal, whatever you want. That adds to a whole lot more structure in your to-do application. So currently we are in this default board, but we can also move over to the other board. So let's add some tasks here. Buy some milk, exercise, something like that. You can move them over, see that all of that works. We got a nice line through effect there. And then I move over to another board and boom, there are no tasks in this board. It's completely empty, a completely new clean slate where you can do something different. Maybe Spanish homework and make a presentation or something. So move this over to completed. I'm all done with that Spanish homework. And then I can move over to default board and boom, we still have our tasks here. I can move this task over here and I can move that over here and I can reload. All of this is persisted, of course. And then I can move over to another board and we got that Spanish homework. It's still completed. Everything seems to be working flawlessly here. So isn't that amazing? But one of the things that we are completely lacking now is the ability to add new boards. So what is a multiple board selection menu if you can't actually add any new boards? I feel like that's actually a shame that you cannot actually add a board here. So today we're going to implement the ability to add more boards. I also feel like we should change the layout a bit here. We could probably put it like to the side of the screen or something on the desktop. I'm sure a lot of to-do applications do it that way. I guess we have like a Google and see what other people do as well. It's always good to be consistent. If you're planning on releasing this software to the world and letting actual users use your software, then it might be good to do some market research and see what other people are doing and copy them. You know, you're gonna steal all their work without giving any credit. No, of course, you can just take some inspiration, just bits and pieces of things that you like from different to-do applications and bring them into your to-do application. That is what we are doing here. We're doing practical development, and it's all about developing software that you want to use personally. It's all about creating something unique, something for yourself, something that you want to use. It's not about following a script. You should not be like completely copying my code. You should not be stealing my work without giving credit. No, of course you can do that if you want, but what I'm trying to say here is that you should tailor it to your own ideas. You should have your own ideas. You should use your own fantastic imagination to come up with some really cool features that you would like to see and something that you feel is lacking in the to-do applications that you are using yourself. So let's have a little Google and see what other people are doing. So to-do application, the most generic search term ever, but there are a lot of to-do applications, as you might know, but we are gonna look at some different inspirations here. You can see this is pretty much what I mean. You know, you have like my lists and you can have like different lists. That is practically what we have implemented already, but it's looking very, very bad right now. So if you feel like you like that, then of course you can continue on with this nice select here. You might like this more minimal approach, but I feel like we should also try out some different other layouts and see what looks the best. I'm not really sure how you can implement this on an app. Perhaps you can have like another menu, you know, but we're not really developing an app here. We're making a web page. We're making a web application. So I don't think we can actually do something like that here. It's more like we can put it in a different layout, of course, but it's not like we're going to have a different screen for selecting boards. I feel like we want to have it on this page as well, but we're just going to have to be a bit creative in how we place that. So that is something we could probably do. So we can have like a sidebar where you can select multiple boards. The only question that I have now is how do we make a responsive layout with this? We kind of want to put it on the top of everything. Perhaps we want to kind of have like boards, like a board list and all of that on top of everything. I'm just thinking how to actually structure this in the HTML, you know. It's kind of important that we can have responsive layouts and also think about that. You know, if you're really making completely different layout, then perhaps you actually need to do something like conditional rendering and actually checking, are we on the phone? Then we make a completely different layout. But with the help of Flexbox, we can do a lot of responsive layouts very easily just by changing the flex direction really, so you can have it in column layout, you know, underneath each other. But since I'm in a split view here, it's kind of difficult to actually have like a sidebar here. I mean, I can definitely implement it, but we are already kind of running out of space here. We don't have a lot of space to work with. On the other hand, if I'm in a full layout like this, you can see that I have a lot of space to work with, and I could definitely cram in like a list here or like a sidebar. I'm just thinking on how to do this on the mobile, but I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So probably want to do this in app.svelte, and we have all of this layout in here. So I have kind of everything just put in here. I have like a board, and then I have the to-do item create, the task file IO. I feel like we should just make this a divider. So why not try that out? Make this a divider, then I can just use Flexbox then to put another divider next to it, like a sidebar. So if I make a parent element now for that flex container, so I make it flex, so that we can have the default, and the default direction here will be column, of course, so you can have things next to each other. And then I put another div here, and I put some content in just to see what happens. Okay, there we go, something happened. We also want to make sure that we're stretching these, so probably want to do flex 1 here to make it fill up the full width here. And then this will be, you know, kind of dynamic. Whenever we add more content, it will be flexible. So that is kind of the thing with Flexbox, that is flexible. So here we actually have our nice sidebar. Let's give it a different background color so that we can tell the contrast a bit more here and see that nice divider we have here. So if I make this BG Blue 700, you can already see that it's stretching vertically, which is kind of what we want to do. We also have some padding here, which we probably want to put on this instead. If we're now going to be doing a sidebar. So if I remove that, it looks a bit different. So if I now add this to this divider instead, we kind of get the same old layout that we had here, but instead we now have a sidebar here. I guess we have a BG Blue 100 here. If I make this BG Blue 200, it should be tell a little slight different in that color, and you can definitely do that here. I'm not sure how good that looks, but I guess we can try it out. So if I just do something like my boards or something like that, and I make this like a H2, my boards, and then I make it a bit larger, so text 2XL or something. And then we also want some padding on this big thing. It's definitely looking a bit tight there, so P4, there we go, there we got something. We also have a super big margin top here for some reason. I'm not really sure why we implemented that, but if I remove that now, we can see it completely got rid of that. And then this selection here, I guess we can comment this out for now, since we're not going to be using that design anymore. So there we go. This looks pretty bad if I'm gonna be honest. I don't get that nice vibe that I had over here. So this, what are they doing differently? They're definitely stretching everything out here. I feel like we want to do that as well, so that we're stretching everything vertically as well. If I just inspect everything here, we can probably have a good clue of why this is happening. We have this MX alt. If I just make this height 100%, will that work? Nope, it won't. If I make it 100 VH, 100 viewport height, it will still not work for some reason. Rather, it will work, but it's not. But it's actually not stretching this flex divider. So if I just make this height 100 VH, there we go. This is more like what I'm talking about. So if I make this 100%, that should also work, yeah. But if I remove that, then yeah, it will not work. So this is a good thing to think about with using percentages, that height 100% will actually not work if the parent element doesn't have a fixed size. But now we actually use 100% viewport height, which is kind of the screen really, or not the screen, but you know, all of the available space on the screen. So maybe there's actually like a Tailwind class for that. Let's see if there is. So if I go to tailwindcss.com and search for 100 VH, it doesn't seem to be the case. Yeah, so as long as the parent has a defined height, but we want it to be viewport height, and it actually has one for that. So height screen, that is what I'm looking for. Nice. Height screen, we want to apply that to this flex container. And then for this flex 1, we can just do height full, I believe, and there we go. It seems to work. Nice. Isn't that cool? I guess we can make this a little bit larger as well. My boards, and give it like a nice font bold here, so make it a bit thicker. I feel like that looks okay. There's definitely something with the colors here that I'm not that big of a fan of. It's got this weird blue feeling to it, which I kind of like, but it's almost a bit too much here. So perhaps we can give it a more white feel in the future. Since a lot of these to-do applications have a pretty standard black and white style, it's kind of unique to play with colors in this way, and not everyone appreciates that. And it's also a thing of, color blindness and different accessibility issues that you kind of need to be aware of if you want to release this out in the wild. So let's now try the same approach where we loop over these boards and kind of show like a card or something that you can click on to change the board. So if I just do the same thing here, and instead of using an option, I can just use like a divider or something. We can remove that value here since we're not going to be using that anymore. And then we can just do something like BG blue 300, even more, padding 2. Boom, there we go. And then we probably want to use some flex as well here to give them a bit of a gap. So something like flex and gap 2. The flex direction should be column here since we want it to be vertical. So there we go. And then for this big parent container, we want to add some nice margin here from that top title, of course. So there we go, that looks a lot better. Perhaps we also want to show which board is active, so we can show a different color when it's active. So let's use this nice class conditional. So you can actually have, I think I definitely showed this in a previous episode, we can actually apply a different class when a condition or expression is met. So you can use something like a class directive here. So class, we want to apply the class BG blue 400, and here we specify a Boolean value. You can also specify like a property that is a Boolean or just an expression that results in a Boolean. So for this, we probably want to do something like current board ID equals board.id. So whenever the current board ID matches the current board here in this loop, we want it to have a different color. And there we go. And now we can actually see that we are in the default board. Isn't that cool? But then of course we also want to be able to click a board here and actually select a board, and that shouldn't be way too difficult. I feel like we should definitely make this a component now that we're dealing with a lot of logic. So like I said, if we're doing lots of JavaScript or TypeScript, then it probably needs a component. So we can have like something like a sidebar or something, and in that sidebar we can go even further and have like a board list or something. I'm not really sure. So I'm not really sure where to put this. I guess it's not really a component, but I guess it's kind of a component, but it's more of a main component. So I guess we can just call this main or something like that. Main is kind of this main layout. It's not like a component that will be used in another place. It's kind of just a main thing for this page here. So the main here, we want it to be like a sidebar or something. So sidebar.svelte. So we have that sidebar component, and then we can put all of this good guy in there. So instead of that, we can do sidebar now. And in sidebar, we put all of this. But notice here that we have this board variable that we are not defined. So we, of course, need to take that in from the parent component. So export let board, that should be a task board array. And then we want to pass that in here as a prop. So boards, or we can just pass it on with the shorthand like this instead of, since it has the same name. And that did not work since we don't have access to current board ID. So of course we need to expose that as well. So it's a string, I believe. And then we want to have the current board ID as well there. So now we can see that that worked. And like I said, we can take this a step further now and create another component, which will be like a board list. This is kind of optional, but if we're going to be adding more stuff to the sidebar, then it's definitely a good idea to create some components for them. Cool, flex container, and then we can just put a board list here, and then we can pass in all of this once more. So we're passing in a lot of stuff. It's getting kind of nested, but I feel like that's fine. So we can just put that there, and then we need to take these in as components as well. So if I just do the same thing, really, there shouldn't be much different. There we go. I can remove that board list import. Boom, we got that nice components now. So we can just work with this board list. We don't have to be in app.svelte and do like look at like a million lines of code here and to find what we're looking for. We just go to board list because we know here is where the board list component is. So that's kind of a nice thing. It definitely helps improving the code readability and just helps you being more focused on what you're doing. So now we want the ability to change the board, and actually, since we have access to that current board ID, we can just change that, I think. So if we make this more mutable, if we have two-way data binding, so that we're actually binding to it, and whenever that changes, we change it in the parent component as well, then we just change the current board ID inside of that component there. So if I just bind current board ID, we have the same nice shorthand here, since it has the same name, and then we can bind that here as well. And then I should be able to change the current board ID whenever you select a board. So we can make a function here like something like select board, and ID will be a string, and current board ID will be that string there. So if we just add an onClick here to that element, so onClick, we want to do select board, and we want to make this an anonymous function since we need to have access to that board here. So select board, and then we pass in the board ID. So select board, and we're still having this accessibility issue. Like I said, we will resolve in a future episode. So let's see if we now can change that board here. So if I go to another board, will it work? Yes, it actually seemed to work. Isn't that cool? And isn't that straightforward? And of course we want to have cursor pointer. Since this is a div element, we actually don't have that nice cursor there. So we can just do something like cursor pointer with the help of Tailwind CSS. So cursor pointer, and boom, it looks like we can click it now. And I feel like since we have this kind of rounded feel to everything, why not make this rounded as well? So that should be pretty straightforward. If I just do something like rounded or rounded MD, yeah, I guess that looks pretty nice actually. It looks a bit better actually now when we have some more rounded vibe to it. I'm not really sure about the contrast here. It kind of looks like I want this to be more white. Let's see if making this text white looks better. It kind of does, I must say. I'm not a color expert, but to my eyes, it's a bit more readable. Maybe this one is more readable now since this is darker, but maybe we can make it even darker if I do something like that. So that actually did not seem to work. It actually seems that that color is being overridden here. So maybe that is something due to the ordering of these Tailwind classes or something. If I look now here, we can see it definitely looks that they have the same color, right? So it's BG Blue 400 on both of them, but we can see that this BG Blue 500 is being applied as well. We can actually see that it's being overridden here by that BG Blue 400. So one way to solve this, I guess, is by changing this order here. So if I change it to something like this, then I make it BG Blue 500 as a default, then maybe it will work. Yeah, it actually worked now. So I'm not really sure about the ordering of these Tailwind classes. It's kind of important that they have the right order. If you really want to solve this, and then of course you can do something like this. So you just apply it, and then you just change the conditional here, so we can have something like this. But this is not that readable, I feel like. So I'm not really sure. I think this is not actually possible to do in Svelte, to have like a toggle based on a value and have like multiple classes like that. I think there's like a GitHub issue about this. I definitely have tried this out before, but maybe it has changed from now on. Feel free to comment about that if you know that it is now possible to do that in Svelte. And then another way to do this is just by using like a ternary statement. So since we can have access to the class here, we can actually put JavaScript or TypeScript expressions here and have like a ternary here. So I can do something like current board ID is board.id, and then I can do BG Blue 500, otherwise it will be BG Blue 400, and this should have the same effect really. So if I remove these class directives here, we can see it has the same effect. So that is also a thing. If you want to make it more readable, perhaps you can do something like this. You could also put that inside of a function and make it even more readable and comment that function or do whatever you want. There's definitely use cases for that, especially if you're dealing with like dark mode and stuff like that. I've done that before, so it's kind of a matter of preference here and what you feel is the most readable to you. I feel like we can continue now with that one since it worked so nicely, and we probably don't want to have like two class directives. I feel like that looks pretty bad. So now we have a nice indicator now telling us which board is selected, and we can actually select the board as well. So that is really nice. We can now switch between boards. I personally feel like this design is much better than that select that we had in the previous episode. But of course we still have the problem that we can't actually create a board. So what's the purpose of having these boards if you can just have default board and another board? You want to be able to create your own board for your needs and name it whatever you want, of course. So let's add that ability now. There's multiple ways to do this. I kind of want to have like a button or like an icon next to this my board. It's like a plus icon or something like that. So maybe we actually want this to be part of the board. I think that is a better way to do this since we want to do this inside of board list as well. So if I just put that in here and do something like that, then we have the same effect really. And then I kind of want to use like flex or something here to have a nice structure. So I do flex here to have like a horizontal layout, and then I can put an icon next to that title here. So, and then we have our nice Iconify library that we looked at in a previous episode. Feel free to check that out if you haven't seen it. So let's now search for an icon here. I guess we can do something like plus or something like that. I feel like we have a plus before, but that was not the right plus. Add, okay, I first do something like add then. Maybe there's a better way to do it. Yeah, okay, so here we have a plus symbol. Symbols add. So they just call it add. There's not actually like a plus symbol. I feel like something like this would look pretty nice. So let's try this out. And then I can make this flex and then put that here and import that from Iconify. And boom, we got a plus. Isn't that cool? And then we want to center it vertically, so we can do something like items center, and then we kind of want a gap here, so gap 2 or something, but this doesn't actually look centered. Why is that? That is a bit weird. Or maybe my eyes are deceiving me. If I make this background color, does that look like it's centered to you? I'm not really sure about that. Maybe it is centered. Maybe my eyes are deceiving me here. It looks like it's a bit higher up than I would want it to be, but maybe my eyes are just not working today. Or maybe you could change the size of it or something like that. So yeah, it definitely doesn't look like it's fully centered here. I'm not sure what that is about. I feel like we had this issue previously, but we kind of solved it by using Iconify. So maybe it's something with material symbols specifically that is not working properly. So if I don't use that, so if I just search for add now, and we don't want to use material icon since it's not working properly. So maybe there's solar. I'm not sure what this is. Solar. If I try using this one, so solar, add circle bold, and then we put that here. Boom. That didn't work, and it looks way worse than the material one, so not sure what that is about. Feel free to comment if you know what the issue here is, but I feel like this items center should definitely do the trick, and it always does for me previously, so not really sure why this is not working now. Not sure what that is about. Feel free to comment if you know the solution to that. So I just want to move on now. So we actually want to use a span so that we actually have an event on that click here. So here we want to have on click. Since this is not a normal link element, we also want to have cursor pointer here, of course. Create board or something like that. And then we bind to that over here. So start create board, and then we can alert board here or something. So when I click that, boom, it seemed to work. So what I want to do now is actually have like a nice modern approach to this. So like we have here for these tabs, we can actually add an input field dynamically or show it dynamically and then focus it immediately. So I kind of want to have this nice approach where you add it like it creates like a new rounded element here, and boom, you can just put in like an input box or something, and you can actually type something. When you press enter there, it will actually add it. So let's try that out. I feel like create board name, and this will be string or null. So I will assign it to an empty string whenever I click the button, and then I want to only show an input box over here if that is not null. So if create board name isn't null, and then of course I want this to be an if statement. So if is not null, and then I render like an input element here or something. So input type text, and boom, when I click this now, we can see board, and absolutely nothing happened. We're not actually assigning to anything here. So create board name will make this an empty string, and boom, this is kind of what I mean. It's a bit large, but I guess we can change that as well. So I guess we can give it like a fixed width or something. I'm not really sure what this width is. It is 200 pixels W24, and do something like that. So I feel like these input boxes have like a fixed width here, so I'm not really sure how to tackle this problem. If I make this like width full, it's not really gonna work since it's still gonna use its, you know, default width here. So I guess we're gonna do some googling here. Use flex width or something like that. Make dynamic width of elements inside flexbox. I guess the easiest way is just to have a set width on the actual flex parent here and actually give that like a set width in pixels or something like that. So that it actually just uses the full width of that and doesn't try to stretch it or something. Feel free to comment if you have a better solution in mind. 4, perhaps, that's a bit too far. So width 50, maybe. Width 50 looks pretty good. So now we want it to be W full. it should not stretch. It should not stretch. It doesn't seem like it actually applied anything at all, but maybe I'm on the wrong one. Yeah, here we go. So width 50 did not work. I guess it has to be a multiple of 2 or something. So 2 or something. There we go. So that is more what I meant. I feel like we could increase the size of this a little bit as well. If I make it 20 pixels. It still doesn't look really centered, but it looks a bit better, I feel like. So now it's actually using that full width that we gave it, and all of the other ones have that same as well since they are stretching. So just like in tabs now, we actually want to autofocus on that element. And let's just have a little peek in tabs to see how we're doing some set timeout. Yeah, so we have this add input. We actually use this nice thing in Svelte where you can actually bind elements to a variable. So you can have bind this. When we bind this, we actually bind the actual HTML element, like just the vanilla DOM element that we can access from JavaScript. So if I bind this, so I can do something like create board input, and this will be a HTML input element or null, and then will be null by default, and then we can actually bind this to that. So we actually give this, we actually bind that to a variable. So bind this to create board input, then we should be able to access that. But like I said, since we're doing conditional rendering here, we need to use this timeout here so that we can actually access it, because it will not be available when we actually change it. Of course, everything is synchronous here. If we just try to access it here, we can see that it will be undefined or something, or null. So create board input, if I do that now, I can see here that it's a null because it hasn't actually rendered yet. But if I add a slight delay, just so that Svelte has some time to actually create that element, so something like 1 should suffice here. So if I log that out now, create board input, then we should hopefully, yeah, so we can see this. You can see this nice input element that we now have access to. All that I want to do here is just autofocus it. So create board input, and then we want to focus on that element. So boom, now we're focusing on that. Isn't that cool? So then I guess we just want to listen for enter keys presses like we've done a million times. So we're just doing something like on key down. We do something like create that function, and we want to have a keyboard event here, of course. Then we want to check that e.key is not entered, and we just want to return early since that is best practice. And then we want to add it, so I guess we just log that out for now, and we actually have access to that now. So create board name, we actually don't have access to it, but we want to have access to it, so just bind it here, I feel like. So bind value and bind that to create board name. And now let's see if I add some text here, and boom, we get access to that nice text there. So all that remains now is actually creating a board. But we actually have not made this mutable. We can actually change it, but Svelte won't really know about it. So we want to use two-way data binding here as well. So we just do something like bind boards, and that should suffice. So bind boards here, and then we want to bind boards in app.svelte as well. So everything is now mutable and has two-way data binding. So hopefully we should now be able to add something to this array, and it should be passed on to the parent component. Let's just have a look here in app.svelte to see the layout for these columns. So I guess we want to copy this over here in board list to create that. So just do like boards equals boards. So like I said, we need to do reassignments in Svelte so that the Svelte compiler knows that we're actually mutating something. Even if pushing would actually add an element to the array, Svelte wouldn't actually be reactive with that. So I guess here we can actually just copy that in, and this should be fine. If I just add that import, and then we just want to put the name here that the user has chosen and not another board. Now the user should actually have power of adding their own boards. So let's see if this will work. If I now add personal, boom, it works. Isn't that cool? Can I have like million personals over here? So now we actually just want to focus out on that element. So I guess we can just do like create board name will be null again. Let's see if that will work. Yes, it will. Nice. But then I also want to have like the blur event as usual. So if I click somewhere else on the page, and focus out on that element, we don't want it to still remain there. So we can just do something like, and then I can do something like create board blur. And then I can do something like create board name is null, so that we are not showing it anymore. And of course this should be on blur and not on blue, on blur. So if I try this out now and I click somewhere else, boom, it disappears. Nice, isn't that really cool? And we also have the benefit of clearing the name now, since we just set it to null. Whatever the user has inputted will just disappear. So it's always nice to think about how you structure your data so that you can have the cleanest code possible. So we just use nullability here, so we can just set this to null, and if it's null, then we don't want to show any text, and we can just bind to it otherwise. That's a technique that I've really adopted in Svelte and that I like working with. But isn't that cool? Now you can actually add your own boards, and I don't think this will persist though, since we have not actually added any events for it. So I guess we want to add an event for this as well, so that we can actually save that to local storage. So let's just do a quick event dispatcher. When we do this, we want to use dispatch. So dispatch board created or something like that. And then we want to pass that on here in the parent component. So event forwarding, so on board created, we pass that on to the parent component, which is app.svelte. So in here, we want to do something like, well, in here, we just simply want to bind to this so that we can save to local storage. So on board created, we want to save everything to local storage, and hopefully that should work. So if I do personal now, and I do some like work and reload, and boom, it has saved. Isn't that cool? So hopefully now I should be able to add some tasks here as well. So if I do some ADSs, the usual keyboard spam, and then I reload that. The default here is the default board. If you want, you could add some variable to your local storage where you kind of persist which current board you're on. We can definitely look at that in the next episode. But as you can see, the tasks are also being persisted here. So that is really cool. If I just add some random order here and I reload, work, personal, just try some user actions to see that everything works as you intend. So it actually seems to be working. Isn't that cool? We now have this really nice sidebar that we can work with. And we also need to look at how to make this responsive, but I feel like we should do that in the next episode. We also want the user to be able to delete some of these boards, default board and another board, for example. We probably just want to remove them. You have like a default board, and we also want the ability to rename boards. So I feel like we should use our nice beloved content editable. So you can just click on this here, change it right away. You don't need to have like a modal for it. I feel like that would be a nice workflow for the user. But all of that will be covered in the next episode. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Feel free to like or dislike depending on what you thought of this video. And feel free to comment if you have any thoughts or concerns, or you caught me doing something stupid, or you just want to share how your project is going. I would love to know. And also feel free to subscribe if you want to be part of this community that I'm trying to build. But other than that, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace out.